I'm with the South Florida Water Management District computer modeler. So I'm a sort of a scientist, but I'm trying to connect the science to what actually happened. So hopefully my job, what I thought was would be valuable is to connect what is in the regional climate action plan in terms of recommendations to why they are there, and kind of give you some idea why it's important to have the water resources issues, and I think the others will address other sectors like energy, transportation. So, you see these pictures on the right-hand side. It's all about children, but although in this region we already seen the effect of things like sea level rise, it's all about children, and I think the one from up there is from Climate Central, but the one on the lower right hand, actually, Leah should be in the audience if she's not here. She's explaining the issues to an ambassador from UN ambassador who was there at the Sea Level Rise Summit at Florida Atlantic University. So I think, I've also got to talk to people. I realize there's a disconnect between the science and the general population, and particularly the kids in high school and college level, that they don't talk about this stuff enough. So this is really valuable too. And I hope you can go and talk to your neighbor, your group, your friends, everybody, and the kids about these important issues. I'm also part of the, like Jim mentioned, I'm part of the National Climate Assessment Advisory Committee. That's the federal advisory committee for the country, and they have produced their report, and I'll show that. And I think Camille Coley, who was here earlier, I don't know if she's here now, she's the other member from Florida, so two of us. And Jim is also heavily involved. He's the lead author for at least 2 chapters, so he has a presence there as well. So, when you talk about climate change and water, you see this little globes on this U.S. This globe, actually sphere, is basically the amount of total water in the entire world. If you were to make a globe out of it or sphere out of it and put it on the western U.S., that's the size of it. It's only like 800. And then this is only if you take the surface water and groundwater, and this is only if you take lakes and rivers. So there's only limited amount of water, and there's a lot of competition in various parts of the world. And South Florida is no different. And the issue is we got people, we have agricultural areas, and we have the environment, and they all compete for the same water budget or water pot, as we may say. So the issue here is that if the climate is changing, are we going to increase the competition between these these 3 sectors in the future? And that's the concern that we have, and I'm going to relate that to that. And if you know why South Florida is important, these are all the cities and the population of the cities under 3 feet all around the coast, and why you can see why South Florida is very important for us. This is going to come up later, and we had the Everglades before man came to South Florida, and we converted that historic Everglades river of grass into basically urban areas and agricultural areas, and what is left of the Everglades. And the real question is, do we have enough water to sustain this natural ecosystem and the people and the ag areas? And I think, and what's the relationship to Everglades restoration that I'm going to mention? So that's kind of what we have seen. So I mentioned the national report, National Climate Assessment Report, and this is the website. It's out for public comment, and I encourage all of you to read that. There are like many chapters. It's over 1,000 pages, I should warn you. But it's written in a way that you can understand. And we worked on Southeast chapter. Several of us were involved. Jim and I were involved. And these are the key messages for the Southeast region. This map shows where the $1 billion disasters happen. Obviously, it's in the Southeast. And the southeast region has about 11 states, and we identified 3 key areas where we need to be concerned about. Obviously, the sea level rise was on top, and you will see why. And the rising temperature, which has an effect on health, water, energy, everything that we need. And then finally, the decreased water availability. In other words, the competition between people and agriculture and the environment is going to increase, because with the increasing temperature and climate change, the amount of water that we need to deal with, will be more and more deficient. So I made a promise early on, I'm going to highlight South Florida in this national report, and I did. And this was a little box in the current report highlighting what our issues are. Nationally, they realized that South Florida region is very critical, and it's a unique region. I'm hoping we'll get some traction on that at the national level. So at the Water Management District, we've been working on this since about 2008 or even earlier. So we try to identify, and what I'm going to present is now very technical. I'm trying to link why it is important for you to be concerned. So you got these natural cycles of climate. You have heard El Nino, La Niñas, occasionally. And then we have the human-induced changes, the land use changes, and people make concrete in urbanized areas, and greenhouse gases. So in the water management arena, that we identified 4 ways that it could affect us. And I'm going to talk about 2 of them primarily today. Rising sea level, and then tropical storms and hurricanes, and what is going to happen to them. And then obviously the temperature increases. All computer models show that it's going to increase, 1 to 2 degrees centigrade. And then the rainfall and droughts models show that South Florida is going to be having a decreased amount of rainfall. There's a lot of uncertainty in predicting rainfall, but the indications are that so you have less rainfall in this region. So what that means to us is like what I call a double whammy. When you have higher temperature, you have increased losses of water and less rainfall. The difference between the 2 quantities is what we have to work with for our water supply. And that's going to be less and less. So that's a concern. So why are we concerned about sea level rise, and what are the sources of sea level rise? Basically it's all about volume of water in the ocean. This is the global sea level rise, not necessarily. And there are many factors why that global amount of water in the oceans will change. Obviously, when the heat content in the ocean is increasing, it's going to expand. So it's going to be increasing the sea level. And then there are other issues like water input due to groundwater withdrawals and reservoirs and other man-made things that will affect how much water is coming into the ocean. And vertical land movement is another factor. When you measure the sea level rise with respect to land, that needs to be considered. Like in Louisiana, sea level is rising a lot faster than here because land is sinking because of the drainage and other factors. But in Alaska, sea level is actually falling because the land is rising because tectonic activity. But in here, we don't have to worry too much about that. But the big unknown is these ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica. Next time you see the Google Earth, take a look at the Greenlands and the Antarctica in the Arctic region. There's enough ice to create some problems for us, and there are signs that they are melting a lot faster than before. And this kind of shows what, this is the Greenland. If all this ice melt, actually the water level in the ocean will rise at least 20 feet. And that's not going to happen, fortunately. But there are signs that increasing ice on the edges in glaciers and others. John Van Leer, who is he has in first-hand seen that when he visits there, and you don't want to even know if all this melts, how much is going to rise. It's going to rise at least like 200 feet. So don't even think about that. But the other issue is, yes, the other issue is this ice in the Arctic, ice in the ocean actually is decreasing in size every year. Last year had the lowest extent of ice. The increase in the winter, decrease in the summer. So that's the other concern, is becoming thinner and smaller. So that's a sign of warming. So if you ever get a chance to see this movie called Chasing Ice, I would encourage you to see that. It's a documentary. It tells you why the ice is melting faster. And that's the big concern. And the computer models are not so good in predicting this, so there's a lot of uncertainty in how fast the sea level would rise. So the sea level has been rising steadily, like what we call a linear trend. The expectation is that it will accelerate in the future because of that ice is melting faster due to warming. So, in terms of projection, I think maybe Jennifer showed the projections that we came up with. This is the latest projection from the National Climate Assessment. I will not go into this broad range, but this is the historical and this is the projection. We have a broad range that has been predicted, but the National Climate Assessment said a good planning value for 1 to 4 feet is what we should use for 2100. And 1 foot of sea level rise here is a lot because we are very flat, and probably will know why. So, and these are all connected now to the Regional Climate Action Plan, why we need to understand the effect of this sea level rise on us. And Jennifer mentioned the mapping that was done. Places like Miami Beach, I was there last week, and they're very concerned. They have what they call sunny day flooding. In other words, there's no rain event, water coming through storm sewers. And then you can see that this is the kind of thing they are expecting. And you can see that at 3 feet, large areas could be underwater. This is just doing what we call bathtub mapping. What we really need to do, which is I think is a recommendation in the action plan, we need to get the scientists and the universities and others to do better assessment of this vulnerability by doing what we call dynamic modeling. In other words, storm surge and all that. It's going to increase the areas that are generally inundated. So you can see why Miami Beach is very concerned and trying to do something about it. And there are infrastructure on the coast. You can see that this is actually, I think it's a wastewater treatment plant right on the coast. And so those are the concerns. The other thing is we have this water management. If you ever drive along A1A, you will see these water control structures. And this is the canal on the land side, and this is the ocean side. We try to maintain for a reason. But when it rains, we try to open the gates and let the water out. Everything is fine. But when the sea level is rising during high tide, there are times now, in certain cases, we cannot open the gate because the ocean side is higher than the land side. So then if there is a rain event like what happened in Miami Beach, you can have a potential to flood. Now, so this infrastructure was built through the collaboration with the US Army Corps of Engineers about 50 years ago, and their design life is pretty much over. So this is the case that you need to think about. How do we tell our local, state, federal governments to look at this problem? And we are looking at this problem. We have done some preliminary analysis. So I asked somebody who used to be there in 1960s, well, didn't you think about sea level rise and saltwater intrusion? He said his boss told him to leave a problem for the next generation. So, So we have done some preliminary analysis of all the structures around. If you drive along, you will see all the structures. Most of the more critical ones are in Miami-Dade and Broward counties. This is where the water level difference is very low, and there are times that we cannot open these gates. So the problem is here, but fortunately we are trying to look at them. We have identified 3 of them, and the other issue is sometimes there is a solution in some cases. This will not be applicable. This is the old structure, and we can put a big pump station to pump water out. These things are expensive. They are not the only solution that will work everywhere, because we may create more problems to the people downstream of the pump station and people who live around this pump station, because it's going to be very noisy, and these are very expensive real estate on the coast. So these are not very cheap. So let me talk about the hurricanes, what has been predicted. The hurricanes seem to have very long natural cycles. If you ever lived in the 40s and 50s, you had a lot of hurricanes. Then a couple of 2 decades, we didn't have this category 3, 4, and 5. Not very many. When I came here, nobody worried about hurricanes because there was not many were going on. But now it seems like we have, again, coming back to this very active period. So we have this natural cycle. At the same time, we have this, the amount of assets on the coast has been increasing very rapidly. So we've been building very expensive infrastructure. So now what happened here happens here is going to be a lot more problematic. And so what are the models or the scientists predict? And this is where you need to be concerned. What they're saying is that as this graphic shows that you will have more and more category 4 and 5 than the other one. So that's the bad news. The good news is that overall the average number of tropical storms will decrease globally. But that's also bad news in some ways because those are those small events that brings in amount of water for water supply. The other bad news is the amount of rainfall increase within the 100 kilometers from center. So this is the other concern that you all need to be aware of that and follow through on that. The other one is the water supply. You know, this is the kind of rock you have in South Florida, very porous like Swiss cheese. So you cannot build levees along the coast and try to stop the sea level rise like the Dutch do, because the water will come basically through the underground. And basically, you know, this is the shape of the saltwater front. And so it has the potential to contaminate the well fields that we draw water from in this area for you all to drink. And so the concern here is, with the sea level rise, will we be accelerating the saltwater intrusion? And that's the concern. And one of the things we have done is to map the baseline. In other words, this is that toe of that saltwater front. So you can see in some areas very too close for comfort to our well fields. And this is kind of where the work needs to be done, support the local county governments to do the kind of computer modeling we need to do to understand how to deal with it. So what are the things we can do? What I call no regret strategies. In other words, if the sea level rise doesn't happen at a very fast rate, we won't regret these things that we took. And some of the things are we need to look for technologies that reduce the amount of additional fresh water needed for water supply. More importantly, re-emphasize the water conservation measures, and these are the things you can think about. And then develop alternative water supply option. Instead of depending on groundwater, there may be areas where you can depend on some surface water, you know, store some of the waters and use them. One good example I'm seeing is this energy water connection, you know, like a PNL plant in Palm Beach County is using treated wastewater pumped from West Palm Beach to this western plant. That's kind of a good example of doing both things and meet the future energy needs. On the Everglades, so the question is, when we plan the Everglades, we assume the climate is not changing, for example, that it is stationary. But so what's going to happen to the sea level rise? And one of the concerns, and this is coming from Havonless, and basically with the saltwater intrusion into the mangroves in the southern areas of the Everglades, basically the geochemical interaction of this salty water with the peat will basically make the peat collapse. And the concern is that the mangroves would start moving north, and so the people are questioning, if this area is going to be inundated, why bother restoring the Everglades, right? The scientists agree now Everglades restoration is more important than ever because you need to provide them water supply, basically to build up peat layer to the extent possible and see if you can counter some of the effect of the sea level rise. And the other issue that I haven't talked about is the coral bleaching that happens in the ocean. So this is about the Everglades restoration. This is why I think you need to get engaged and support the Everglades restoration for all the reasons that I mentioned. I think this is in the Regional Climate Action Plan. We need to make sure that we restore the
freshwater supplies to the Everglades. Basically, Everglades restoration is an important adaptation response to climate change. And basically, it's not a reason to delay. Climate change is not a reason to delay that. And increased water supply is important. So I think this is another action plan item that you all need to say that restoration is very important, not only because it's an important national treasure, but it's also a means for countering some of the effect of climate change.